we'll get kicked off with this webinar in just a moment. We're recording the session and we will share the recording with you all afterwards, along with the slides. And we've got some time at the end for questions. So please do pop any questions or comments in the chat as we go along, and we'll hope to get to as many of those as possible at the end of the session. Please also feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. It's always nice to be able to know who's joining us. And we will have a poll question to understand who's joining us as well. So you'll have a bit of a chance to say what sort of organisation you're joining from. But yeah, I'll kick us off and start sharing. But yeah, thank you very much for joining this webinar on what does place-based retrofit look like in practice. Okay. So we've got a bit of a packed agenda for you today. We're going to do a little bit of welcome and intro. I'll talk briefly about why we might take a place-based approach to retrofit, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Talisa, who's going to talk you through some of the latest guidance that we've been producing and a report that we've just launched, and we'll stick a link in the chat to that so you can look into it in more detail. We'll give you a bit of an overview of the case studies that are included in that document, because they're a really big part of how we've tried to make all of this feel as real and as actionable as possible. And then we've got three fantastic speakers joining us who will give presentations. I'll introduce them in just a second. We'll have time towards the end for a bit of a discussion. So yeah, as I mentioned, do put your questions in the chat, and then we will wrap up and talk to you a little bit about next steps. So this is a project which we at the NRH are doing in collaboration with the Energy Demand Research Centre and UKGBC with the support of the MCS Foundation. And today we're joined by Helen Langley from Dudley Council, Matthew Clubb, who's going to talk to us about Oxton Community Retrofit, and Andrew Rice from the MCS Foundation, who's going to talk about the local area retrofit accelerator pilots. These are all case studies that are featured within the report, and we thought it might be nice to hear a little bit more detail from each of those case studies featured, so you can really understand the work that they've been doing in a bit more context and detail. So before we get started, we're going to have a bit of a poll. So if you're happy to launch that, please, Ben. We're just asking, where are you joining us from? What type of organisation are you from? And we'll give you a minute or so just to pop in the right answer. Seeing quite a nice balance of local councils, combined authorities and community organisations, also academics, NGOs and charities, some designers, some retrofit facilitation providers, and some others as well. If you've put down other, please do pop in the chat what type of organisation you're coming from, because it's always good to understand if we've missed a specific group, or if there are people joining from maybe outside some of the sectors that we often talk to. It's always good to hear. So I've got about 105 people completed, still coming in a little bit. So I'll just give that another second before I share the results with you all. What we're going to be talking about today is really kind of aimed at those people who are working in place. So local combined authorities, community organisations, all those people who can potentially have an impact in a specific locality. So it looks like we've got a good coverage of people who'll find this research useful. I'm going to end the poll now just so you can all see who is joining us. Should you be interested, you can have a quick look there. I'm going to do a quick screenshot so I can remember. Perfect. Okay. Next up, why do we need change? So some of you who joined the last webinar where we discussed what the definitions and the key principles around place-based were may have seen these slides before, but I think they're really important to ground us in why we're having this conversation. Why can't we just, get on with it, scale up what we're currently doing, keep repeating business as usual? Back in 2023, we did a report on the state of the nation of retrofit delivery, and we identified lots of challenges like underspend in grant-funded programs, under delivery, limited supply chain capacity linked to a skills shortage, We know that there have been quality issues raised at that time and also subsequently in the last couple of years. That's been something that's been a big focus. That all leads to a lack of trust, limited uptake, and we're also sort of seeing low engagement and high dropout rates with sort of more place agnostic schemes. We know that business as usual retrofit isn't delivering the scale and pace we need to meet national targets. And also that citizen engagement and demand is a really key component of what's needed, but it's currently too low. And we also have been looking at this through multiple projects like our measuring outcomes and impact evaluation project that there are so many benefits possible through retrofit, but we know that business as usual isn't actually delivering as many of those as possible and isn't necessarily meeting community needs. And that's when we look at things like fuel poverty and health and climate resilience. And just to sort of focus in on the scale, so this was, as I mentioned, the work that we completed at the end of 2023 that showed the scale that we need to be delivering at and what we're currently doing. So the big green bubble is homes below an EPCC in the UK. The white is the retrofit measures that have been delivered since 2013. And the orange are of those, which one of them are straight up boiler replacements. Now, obviously, we know that there's been work continued that has been done in the last couple of years. But what you can see here is that, the scale at which we're currently delivering business as usual isn't meeting the sort of ambition that we have for this country. Whether you think EPCC is the right target or not, we probably need to even go beyond that if we're thinking about decarbonising all of our homes. So there's a real opportunity here to do better, but also to do better at scale and pace. So what we found in our research that those top-down, those market-led approaches have created this sort of boom and bust cycle. It's created a really an industry that's very dependent on government grant funding in order to work, and it's also led to a lot of uncertainty. Those sort of market-based, profit-driven schemes have often resulted in cost cutting, and we've seen the results of that with the low-quality installations and those that haven't met the standards that we need to see uncovered over the last year or so. We also think that these place agnostic approaches are really missing opportunities to make sure that retrofit does meet the needs of residents and communities in a place, building uptake, helping to build trust. And we think there's lots of opportunity to better support local supply chains to grow and develop by engaging those, providing them with pipelines of work and helping them to develop further. So place-based retrofit is trying to make this sort of transition from short-termism, fragmented policy landscapes towards more sort of long-term, locally informed, interconnected strategies. It's shifting towards a deeper understanding of social context, local needs, and resources, and really also trying to make sure that we involve people in a real way through participation, through co-design, and through a way that is meaningful. And we also want to sort of support a transition from house by house to street by street, collective, area-based and regenerative approaches that may look different in different places depending on the geography and the resident needs. But really trying to sort of move away from the one by one to the many and doing that in a way that meets the needs of all of those people. I'm now going to pass on to Talisa, who's going to tell you a bit more about the report that we've just published and what you can find within it. So yeah, over to you, Talisa.
Yeah, so like taking all of the challenges into account that Rachel's just mentioned and the sort of direction of change that they point to with the like growing role of place-based approaches. In our newest publication, which is Place-Based Retrofit in Practice, we're sort of looking at what this means and the type of action that people are taking on the ground. So in that guide, we sort of explore and summarize again what a place-based approach is and why we need it, and how it's currently like intersecting with current developments in policy. And then in the second section, we look at some of the fundamental steps that are involved in bringing together a strategy, such as what the geographical scope might look like or what might be most appropriate given for a given project, different partnerships, stakeholders and roles, and how those relationships might be stewarded. And also thinking about how we can like think about how different retrofit strategies and initiatives can really integrate a deep understanding of place into the interventions and projects that they design. And then in the third section, we explore some of the key components and aspects of retrofit delivery in a bit more detail, such as delivery channels involving and developing the supply chain, how communities are involved, and coordinating place-based finance and evaluation frameworks. So it's going to be a little bit of a whistle-stop tour because we could probably talk about each of these sections at length. But so yeah, I'm going to give you a bit of an overview. If next slide. Um, so in the first section, we introduce what we mean by place-based retrofit and why the approach is so important. And in summary, what we sort of describe is that bringing together the partnerships and foundations which are needed to make retrofit work locally is really important, and that they need to support both citizens and practitioners to shape delivery together to increase uptake and respond to the realities of each community. And that will sort of like help move beyond fragmented top-down and market-based schemes by making sure that retrofit is really relevant to local people, to local businesses, um, that it's co-designed alongside them, and that hopefully by taking those actions which support the relationships between different organizations and citizens, that would create a more resilient system which isn't as susceptible to like shocks and changes in policy, but allows itself to self-sustain and keep delivering more retrofit. But yeah, so it should be responsive to the unique characteristics, contexts, and needs of different places. The next slide. Um, this work that we've done in this chapter builds upon the first publication that we released earlier this year, and I'm sure we can put a link to it in the chat. But this was based upon a lot of the work that and research that we did in autumn, where we brought people together in a workshop and did a lot of desk-based research, just trying to find out what a place-based approach was and what kind of definition or understanding of it would resonate with the people practicing retrofit and the people and citizens generally. So what we landed on as like our understanding of place-based retrofit was that they should build strategies and partnerships which enable citizens and practitioners to collaborate and tailor retrofit delivery to the resources and needs of local communities, and that the stewardship of those relationships um, should meaningfully engage with local knowledge and networks to build that. So next slide. Um, and then the role that we sort of see this playing in practice and we're in this publication is that by making retrofit really relevant to the place and to local communities and local businesses, and also the retrofit system is that it can build a broader culture of care and repair by creating avenues through which citizens can touch, feel, and see the many benefits that retrofit can bring to their homes and neighborhoods, and just seeing it firsthand, and being able to see the many benefits that can be targeted through a place-based approach, and bridging those gaps in involvement and engagement by making the most of that sort of like in-person, people-centered, and place-based delivery. Next slide. Um, So if we dive a little deeper into the sort of understanding that we developed in these earlier stages of work, we sort of see like a place-based strategy as wrapping around the local delivery of retrofit, and that might look like area-based schemes and whole street retrofit, or individual homeowners taking steps through a local advice hub, or through a retrofit coordinator advice service, and that might be really within like a neighborhood or a smaller scale, but there might be a wider place-based strategy which seeks to link up those initiatives with broader elements in like the supply chain and financing, um, and just the broader environment within which it's sitting so that it can flourish, rather than like struggling on its own. Um, so we developed four principles during during this early stage of work as well, which were collective governance and partnership working, um, which was really about being able to equitably distribute decision making and influence among local partners and being able to move beyond siloed approaches, and also for it not to be the responsibility of just like local government or retrofit facilitation providers or community organizations, but that we can really like unlock people working together. And then the second being that collaboration, involvement, and participation is really important with both citizens and small enterprises and community organizations being able to co-design strategies together. And again, that a place-based approach would really build upon local knowledge and understand lived experience as a valid form of expertise in itself, rather than just a nice to have or um, and for that to be brought alongside in addition to technical and specialist insights. And lastly, that the relationships that a place-based approach should foster would be ones that encourage reciprocity between different actors rather than extractive approaches, and that might not just be between different organizations or between citizens or between consumers, um, but also with things like the environment and other aspects of the retrofit system which we have relationships with. Um, so next slide.
I'm just giving you a 3-minute warning, Talisa, for your
No
section.
worries. And then we also asked our network what people would like to see as outcomes from a place-based approach. And that included, again, the creation of partnerships, community involvement, that deep understanding, having the right enabling infrastructure, so that we can build strong supply chains, target benefits, which include and go beyond energy efficiency, um, distribute those benefits equitably between different socioeconomic groups, and also create that long-term momentum and confidence that allows the retrofit supply chain to develop. So next slide. In the second section of the publication, we explore those three cross-cutting elements associated with like building a deep understanding of place, creating partnerships, and the scope of a place-based strategy. So next slide, please. And when it comes to defining the geographical scope, we're taking a more flexible approach where we don't think that there is like one singular scale that's the most appropriate, but rather it's about looking at the social and civic infrastructure, different operation influence, this sort of scale you want to take, and being flexible where partnerships can support local delivery. Um, and for building partnerships, that a diverse set of partners are included and that decision making is equitable, and actors which can take a more active role, understanding who they are and how to allocate responsibility according to that. And then with building a deep understanding of place, it's about taking a systems approach and using as many different ranges of and sources of information and being able to map external factors which affect the retrofit system locally and to affect local energy vulnerability. Next slide. And then in the third and final section of the guide, we look at a few more of the um, more components like creating delivery channels, how to involve and develop the supply chain, how to involve and engage communities, coordinating place-based finance, and creating an evaluation framework. So next slide, please. Um, when it comes to creating delivery channels, we speak about the different types that might be used and how they might be used in combination to account for different neighborhoods and how using, for example, like area-based schemes or advice hubs might be tailored towards the different neighborhoods and housing types within an area, whether there's more able to pay or there needs to be a more targeted approach somewhere might but also when involving and developing the supply chain, that there's a plan to support skills um, businesses to develop and to look at local materials and how access to national supply chains works. When it comes to community participation and involvement, that residents should be put at the heart of decision making to build buy-in and raising literacy and demystifying it and allowing citizens to really to be a part of it. Next slide. Um, Finally, for coordinating place-based finance, we look at things like blending different funding streams, like the net zero neighborhoods model, or how different finance methods might be combined, also using opportunities associated with the ownership of local energy assets. And when it comes to creating an evaluation framework, with you're thinking about how um, local needs and priorities and aspirations can be set at an early stage in a place-based project to allow citizens and local organisations to identify the specific outcomes which they want to measure. Um, yeah, and then next we can maybe skip this one, but we also include a bit of information and signposting around the different parts of the Warm Homes Plan, Pride in Place strategy, and local power plan that sort of align with place-based work and where there are certain opportunities. Um, like, for example, in the Pride in Place strategy, the creation of neighbourhood boards and governance structures, which could play a role in community involvement, but also influence how someone might design the geographical scope of a project. And again, with the local power plan, with the community co-owned energy projects and assets. But next slide. And then, so there's lots of case studies in the guide, and it would be really, really difficult to do justice to um, all of them in this really short space of time. Um, but I think the value that they bring in, especially in a place-based approach, is not just about delivering locally, but being able to connect different examples across the UK. And I think there's a big shout out needed for the program, the Retrofit Connects program that can share and learn from each other. But yeah, next slide. And that brings us to the presentations that Helen, Matt, and Andrew will give us about their projects and how they've engaged with a place-based approach. Um, so first of all, we're going to hear from Helen from Dudley, which I can't wait for you guys to hear about.
Hi, thank you everyone. My name's Helen Angby from Dudley Council, and I've been talking today about how we're working towards creating a net zero neighbourhood here within an area of Dudley called Brockmore. And what we recognised very early on it was that as a council, we don't have the resources or the expertise to be able to take this place-based approach. So we set up a collaboration of partners to work together. So we have Equans, who is our leading principal contractor, who carried out all the retrofit works, but they also were the project manager, and they also had valuation. And also Keele University, and we tried a different way of working with resident engagement, taking a user-centric approach, and also we use their expertise with their technical knowledge of how to use heat pumps. They then work with Connected Places Catapult for the transport side and helping with the evaluation, and then Carnegie Systems, which has helped with the monitoring in the houses. Next slide, please. So we try to take a different approach to what we normally take by having this place-based approach, but it's very much about having the residents and the households at the heart of the decision-making process. So we took a very long lead in time, nearly a year, to work with the residents to improve their knowledge, to increase their confidence, so they could then help with the decision making. So we then with on the outside, then we're looking at the houses, we're looking at green spaces, the transport, community resilience. And then all linked into this, we're looking at ways that we could be able to produce a revenue for the council, so we could then roll that out for further schemes going forward. And that's primarily through the solar on housing. Next slide. So on one of the housing pillars then, we want to really create a sort of a thriving green neighbourhood where all the households are really proud to live, to be able to live. And what we want to do is really try and improve the living standards so that they can afford to be able to heat their homes, and they're living healthily in homes that are free from damp and mould. So one of the main things we wanted to achieve was to remove the gas from the houses and replace it with air source heat pumps. And then we've also included solar PV, battery installation, ventilation. But what we wanted to do under this project was also to be able to have the opportunity to trial out some innovation measures. So we've looked at trialing some air tightness measures, and also we're creating a off-site manufactured external wall insulation system. Next slide. I think it's here that, particularly with the transport and the green spaces, we're actually seeing that residents can make a decision, and we can then go on to carry out those measures based on what the residents decide. At the very beginning, when I put the bid together, I sort of got grand ideas of having mobility hubs and cycling routes, EV chargers, but actually the consultation with the residents, what they actually wanted to, which would try and encourage them to be able to leave their cars at home and use public transport more, or just going out on the cycling, walking, was they wanted to have the roads, make the roads safer. They wanted to feel confident that they could go out there and use and without feeling at risk. So these are the measures which the residents came up with, and so these are the ones we implemented. Next slide. And again, with the green spaces, we didn't really account for much in the original bid. A small amount of money was set aside. What we hadn't recognised was just how important green spaces are to the residents of the area, and how much it came up time and time again, how they wanted to see their green space improved. So with the opportunity with this funding, we could be very flexible. So we shuffled things around so that we could then invest a lot more in what was important to the residents. Next slide. And then on the commercial industrial side, the pub, which is very much heart of the local community, and the school, we wanted to help them, so we put solar PV and battery. And then we're working with the other 3 industrial estates around the area to try and find ways if we can come up with a shared renewable energy scheme and community energy schemes. Next slide. So how is it all funded then? It's cost about 3.5 million, and it's all been done through a blended finance solution of all public funds, or you can see all the different grant streams there that we've used. But then what we also wanted to try and do is, so we can help our next projects, we want to be able to create a revenue. So we've used Levelize, and we look to use Urban Chain, both ways where we can reduce energy bills for the residents, but also bring in an income to the council. Next slide. So what have we learned? So why a community-centric approach? Well, certainly we've managed to engage with households which we wouldn't traditionally been able to engage with. A very high level of vulnerable households took up the offer, and I think that was much higher than we would have used to expect. And I think I think it's important we recognise that the approach we take is that it's Brockmore's net zero neighbourhood. It's not a net zero neighbourhood in Brockmore. So we're not going out there with a blueprint and trying to make the area work. It's the other way around. I think it provides a much higher level of support for the residents, pre-measures, the good year lead-in, having someone on the ground all the way through the process of having the work done, and also post-measures as well. It's been so important to have someone there for quite some periods, certainly one winter afterwards, to be able to help the residents. And from this, we're seeing better outcomes. And then also, it's about creating a legacy for the project. Next slide. I think innovation, place-based and community-centred projects requires a different approach to contracting and oversight and collaboration. We need to recognise that when we're contracting, that we have plenty of time to be able to engage prior. It's not just about the delivery. In the contract, it needs to be all about engagement. And then in the contract also needs the flexibility so we can change activities. We can also change our outputs and outcomes as we go along in response to what the locals, households and characteristics will be asking for. And it's that ability to change direction, change the time within that contract. It needs to be a lot more flexible for us. Next slide. And it's also about building a legacy. It's not just about walking away from the project as soon as it's finished. We've created a residents group within the neighbourhood so that they feel empowered and feel strong enough and enthusiastic enough to be able to carry on with this journey towards achieving net zero. And it's a case of it, I think, this legacy is about having a sense of belonging. We've really seen that in Brockmore, that people are really proud of where they live now, and there's a real sense of community cohesion. And then I think what we've also recognised as a legacy that it still needs that bit of support from the council. So we have an in-house energy advice service, and they are there on hand. We can't expect residents to be able to make such a huge change of moving from gas boilers to air source heat pumps and understand that technology overnight. And we're finding that even a year on, these residents need someone to be able to go to be able to make those adjustments. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Helen. I think that's such a fantastic example of so many of the principles that we've been uncovering, and particularly that sort of basing the projects and what you deliver on the outcomes that the tenants and the residents want to see, and building engagement and trust that way. Yeah, really exciting. If you've got questions for Helen, do pop them in the chat and we'll have a chance to talk to her a bit more at the end of these. I'm going to pass over to Matt now. Over to you, Matt.
Hi, thanks, everyone. Yeah, so I'm Matthew Clubb. I run a private architectural practice in Aberdeen in Scotland. So I noticed we're the only Scottish case study on the map, which is great. But we're working on a couple of different projects and place-based projects. I also chair the North East Scotland Retrofit Hub, so we're a big believer in community engagement. So this project is in Oxton in the borders, in the Scottish borders, which is a bit of a distance from us. Yeah, as you saw in the map there, it's a small rural community with around 150 homes in the village of Oxton. And we were primarily concerned with a cluster of 45 timber frame homes built in the early 2000s in a cluster called Justice Park. Now, these were classed as being LHE's Cat 1 kind of heat pump ready. So in Scotland, we have these local heat and energy efficiency strategies. So in theory, exclusively with owner occupiers. Now, we weren't really involved in the design of the project. There was funding made available through Scottish Government or other from Scottish Government through local action groups, working with the council and working with the Borders Energy Agency to develop the project. And initially, every homeowner in that cluster was offered a free retrofit assessment. They actually went with a different contractor initially, and that part of the project kind of failed because the assessments weren't really bespoke enough. They didn't really engage the community. And so we were actually then brought into the project to provide further retrofit assessments and what I'd call a kind of light touch retrofit assessment where we offered thermal imaging and air tightness testing to another 6 households. And then it went on to a retrofit design and coordination stage, which I'll explain a little bit more about as we go. Next slide, please. So despite these being all quite sort of relatively modern houses, we still found lots of issues. So missing sections of insulation, just wrecked, essentially, especially in kind of room and roof spaces, which is what you see the thermal images of here, some of which originated from when the homes were originally built. Next slide, please. Under floor voids, very much the same. You know, the tightness testing that we did was really good. You know, I think we find time and time again that people are really engaged when you actually show them how from doing air tightness testing on so many of these buildings. Next slide, please. And that allowed us to sort of very specific sort of common issues amongst the homes where they've been modified and so on. And in some cases, you know, safety. We take videos when we do smoke testing as well, and you know that is really engaging. Watching people kind of take a breath as they see those videos is great. Next slide, please. A surprising amount of thermal bridging going on in some of these homes as well. So condensation, damp, and mold, actually not a surprise. Next slide, please. Yeah, some pretty detrimental effects going on in some of these homes. Next slide, please. From a ventilation perspective, almost exclusively, they're all running just extract fans and trickle vents, but pretty much every home failed the ventilation assessment. Next slide, please. From a glazing perspective, most of them were double glazed. There was the odd bit of double glazing and single glazing, but given the age of these homes, quite a lot of them were actually looking at glazing replacement because the existing original units were starting to fail. So from all that, we then developed this kind of overarching kind of plan of what retrofit plan could look like for these homes, with a stage one group of measures that were essentially fairly easy wins. Air tightness measures that were quite common amongst many of the homes, ventilation upgrades, accessible loft and room and roof upgrades, and smart thermostats, things like these. But what's interesting to note here as well is that while these homes are all marked as being heat pump ready, pretty much half of them had micro-bore pipework, which we know is tricky with heat pumps. And their existing heating systems were actually 5 different systems going on, people using oil or gas. And, the great thing actually was that there's a real community around how they acquired their energy. So they had a communal distribution network for their LPG. They bought their oil in bulk as a community as well. So from that point of view, there seemed like there's a real opportunity to use the community as a vehicle for procurement in getting some of these measures dealt with. But we went to the next stage of providing a retrofit design for these measures. And went out to tender, and the people who designed the project kind of followed a traditional procurement route, which meant we were going out to local certified contractors, of which there were only 2 when it came to the fabric measures, and 4 or 5 when it came to the renewables measures. And the nature of cost meant that a lot of people were perhaps not accustomed to the cost of what these measures might include. So, we remained flexible with this, and quite a few people in the community were, quite DIY keen, and so we actually then developed a homeowner workshop. Next slide, please. Because what we were sort of saying to people was actually, well, maybe some of these measures, you could do yourself. And so we designed a community workshop, hands-on half-day event to teach people how to do insulation in their loft, air tightness and ventilation properly. So this is the workshop with lots of custom-made kits for timber frame homes. We also gathered air quality data during this project. So some people did implement 1 or 2 things themselves, but actually the result of this workshop was some people kind of coming along and learning and then going, oh yeah, okay, maybe loft insulation is actually more challenging than I thought. And they have then chosen to look at using a contractor. So, I think a really great kind of learning experience from that point of view. And one of the great things is that actually one of the local councillors came on this project, on this training course, and went away saying, right, I'm going to get all my place planners to take this course if we can. So, there's been some great lessons learned. Next slide, please. So just kind of in summary, we know that when we engage people with good, proper technical advice, we really engage people and we build trust. So, tick, we did that on this project. In theory, heat pumps were viable on this project, but there were so many easy wins and things that could be done that would have reduced energy saving by 25%. That really those things seem worth getting hold of. But there was problems with the way the project was funded, in that it was piecemeal bits of funding that kind of brought us on and on and on. And if I did the projects again, I would not do it that way. I'd say, right, look, come on, let's just engage in one solid project, and consistent communication would really help. We're really lucky to have Home Energy Scotland in Scotland, providing funding, but we actually ended up finding that almost none of the homes qualified for funding because Room and roof wasn't covered, despite us evidencing the fact that there were actually lots of issues with the room and roof insulation in these projects. And some of the measures that Home Energy Scotland spec weren't actually feasible. So when it came to delivering measures and the procurement side of things, that was really tough because we were trying to engage local contractors, and that takes time to build up the relationship, where we had a really short timeline for delivery. So a lack of general approved contractors is a problem, and the cost of the heat pump installs, because of the micro bore and the kind of location, meant that it was still out of reach, even with the grants, for a lot of people. So there's so much more I could share and tell you about, but they're the main things, and that we've learned, and we'd love to do more projects like this. Learn a lot from it, but yeah, happy to take questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And yeah, I think that's really great to be able to see how these different types of projects can be instigated at different scales and then connect to other scales. So instigating a project at that neighbourhood level, kind of scary, isn't it, that they were deemed heat pump ready projects when clearly they needed a significant amount of work to make them, healthy for the occupant and to be able to be decarbonised. I know that there's some quite technical questions for you coming on the chat. So if there's any of those that you're happy to answer directly in the chat, then please do go ahead. And we will now pass over to Andrew. Andrew, over to you.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Andrew Rice, Programme Manager at the MCS Foundation. I'm going to be talking about the Local Area Retrofit Accelerator pilot. So first we'll be talking about what is LARA, what is place-based retrofit, and just an overview of the LARA process, what we've learned, and then the next steps. So I'll be talking quite a bit about the similarities between the key outputs and purpose of the guide that Talisa went through earlier, and our LARA program and what we've been finding. Next slide, please. So what is LARA? So it's a bottom-up system-based, place-based co-design approach to designing retrofit strategies. So we get all of the key stakeholders within a local retrofit system. So in our pilot, that was the East Midlands, Surrey, Hertfordshire, and Liverpool City region. So 4 pilots. We get them into 3 in-person workshops, go through a number of activities, essentially to output a retrofit strategy. And what that retrofit strategy, that LARA retrofit strategy does is operationalizes place-based retrofit. So it turns that ambition that the locality has. So at the very start, we identify where they want to go, what their ambition is, and each one is different. There are some similarities, but there are key differences to what they're trying to achieve, and then coordinate that on a systems level. Next slide, please. So place-based retrofit, as I say, it delivers retrofit according to the local priorities. So what we found across the 4 different localities was entirely different approaches. Yeah, there were clear similarities, but I won't go through them now, but our report details what those kind of individual objectives were, and we focus on those. So a local retrofit strategy.
Yeah.
So a local retrofit strategy builds a clear place-based mission. So indeed, we go through building a vision, a mission, goals, and actions within that strategy based on what the locality needs. It helps build market certainty by signalling demand and where investment and actions can be taken. It also is an approach to lower barriers for organisations to engage. So traditionally with a top-down strategy, there isn't that much engagement at those early stages. That tends to happen afterwards with consultations. LARA flips that on its head and gets those local actors into a room to participate to make the strategy. And we don't just kind of stop there. So from the very start, we have strong governance set up with governance groups and other groups that will take us through that co-design phase and into delivery, where that governance continues. Next slide, please. So the LARA process is it's approximately a year, just under, to go through the co-design process. So these first two phases. And the first phase of that is of what we call building a mandate. It's to do a stakeholder assessment. So working with the locality leads, which are typically local authority leads, will identify all of the stakeholders that need to be present in that room. So you're looking for a target of about 50 to 60 local stakeholders across the retrofit system, and getting them into the room essentially and involved in the process. We then do a locality assessment, which focuses on really understanding the local retrofit system across those 6 pillars, as I'll come on to explain. And we determine on a RAG rating basis, essentially. So if we take skills, for example, how is skills performing in that locality? We can then use that to influence the co-design phase, which is phase 3, which typically lasts about 18 weeks. So it's 3 workshops with working groups in between, typically spaced about 6 weeks apart from each other. And then, as in the pilot, with the pilots, and we'll be advocating this through our toolkit, is a 3-year strategy period, which we call acting together. And that is essentially delivering the strategy. As I mentioned, importantly, keeping those governance structures in place to keep that delivery going. And another important thing is the monitoring, evaluation, and the learning framework to be in place to measure that benchmark, which is the locality assessment, against what's being delivered. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, the LARA model advocates that there are 6 pillars to the local retrofit system. So some of these pillars are kind of capture-all, so there are a few different elements within, but those pillars are skills, community, homes and health, funding, governance, and low carbon technology. So by looking at the system as a whole, we can target those interactions that are needed and interventions. And we continually review those. I mentioned this, we take a RAG rating of each of these pillars. We continually review that throughout the co-design process to see, are we answering? So if it was a red, for example, are we answering why that was a red, and creating goals and actions and an overall vision to address that. And indeed, where there might be greens, so it might be that the locality is excellent at gaining funding. How do we exploit that further and link that with the other areas of the system? So strong at attracting funding, poor at skills. How do we make those two work together? So that systems thinking, which you see regularly in the guide, is critical. What we've learned so far, so local co-design, having the flexibility in your co-design model is really key. So yes, you've got to have a structure, and indeed our toolkit, which I'll come on to mention, gives a fairly an outline of how to deliver co-design, but it's really important to understand that local context, not only to understand what the aims and objectives are of that locality, but also there might be local nuances like housing stock differences, historic differences. So in the East Midlands, a historic mining region, there are going to be projects and initiatives that can target that historic context. So a one-size-fit doesn't always work. And also, just go back, I've got a few more points on that one. Local ownership of the strategy, of course, increases likelihood of delivery. So all of those people and organisations that were involved have a stake in delivering it. Local understanding. So again, throughout National Retrofit Hub's report, guide, sorry, it really clearly says that having a deep understanding of the locality is key, and that helps us design our co-design approach. Collaboration is critical, and it doesn't just happen. So we can't overemphasize that the workshops aren't just a nice to have. It's really important to get those people together and talking and collaborating, and through, be it the face-to-faces or the working groups, we picked up on many examples of kind of eureka moments where it's like, oh crikey, why didn't I speak to you before? Or we're doing this here, you should join us and share some of the costs. And so systems thinking is absolutely critical in this kind of in this process, this LARA process. So we look to remove silos and identify where those supply demand gaps are to address them. As I mentioned, strong governance is absolutely key. So there's a focus on that throughout the process, and also consistent engagement or continued engagement. We say so. Keep on engaging the system. Keep on engaging local people with that strategy work. Next slide, please. So what is next? So we have 3 retrofit strategies published now. We're looking to publish the 4th and final strategy of the pilot in the summer, which is Liverpool City Regions. All of the areas are doing fantastic work to start getting their roadmaps ready to deliver those strategies in the acting together phase. And we are looking to support them, particularly with elements such as their warm home delivery. So looking at where can they work with local suppliers and start ticking off some of those goals and actions that they've got in their strategies through work that they're already doing, and how we can accelerate that work that they're already doing. Also things like integration with health. And so health, importantly, is probably worth mentioning, is one of those areas that was, because of shortages and capacity, was quite hard to engage with during the co-design process. So how can we think about engaging with them further through the delivery? Part of my role and the programs team at MCS Foundation is to promote and champion the LARA retrofit strategies. So talking about it, working with organisations within those areas to keep on championing and making sure that those goals and actions are being delivered. We're developing and testing the model, so we're continually looking at where we can improve the model, and that's through working with the localities, the pilot localities, and other organisations to make sure we've got key elements right and keep on reviewing them. And ultimately, we'll then publish our LARA toolkit, which is being worked on now, hopefully kind of late summertime this year. And another key piece of work that we're doing is engaging with other localities that are looking to support to run a similar process. So a co-designed retrofit strategy development. So we've been kind of casually.
Andrew, I might just have to ask you to wrap it up if that's okay. Yeah, sure. Just thinking, getting a couple of questions.
Final points. So yeah, just working with other localities to help them in their journey through what we've learned and found through us.
Amazing. Thank you so much there. Hopefully we've got time for a couple of questions. We've been seeing lots of them come in on the chat. And I think these are 2 questions that potentially all of you might have something to contribute to. So we had one which came in response to Helen's presentation, which is asking about the principal internal barriers that Helen, you found before the council engaged in the work you were doing, and how would any of you encourage other councils to move forward given their internal resources, local government reform, and the sort of pressures that councils are facing? I don't know, Helen, if you've got any reflections on that to kick us off.
Yeah, for me, the hardest part of any project is always getting through the legal side and with procurements. And I think this project very much we've learned that a traditional contract and a way of procuring isn't doesn't meet these needs. You know, what we need is to have a contract which is flexible, that allows for innovation, to allows for different time limits. You know, there's tend to be in the contract be set outcomes we need to achieve and outputs, but they will change as we're working with the residents and of what we're actually doing. And you know, we just a lot more flexibility around that. The actual working with directors, which we're obviously used to working very much in silo, that actually hasn't been a challenge. That was very easy for us to all work together and sit around the table. But it's the legal side of the contract that was most challenging. And then going forward, I think what will be the hardest challenge for us to replicate it is the different priorities for the different teams. We all pulled together on this one as it was a trial one, but actually going forward, transport priorities will be very different to housing priorities. And I'm not sure yet how we can make that work and align them together.
Fantastic. I don't know, Andrew and Matthew, if you've got any thoughts on that point as well.
I guess for me, collaboration is important, and just having a consistent funding approach seems to be the main challenge. And I mean, I don't work for a local authority, but I'm trying my best to infiltrate them and help them work out how to deliver these projects. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess on the collaboration point, so a few examples from our work was how people have already done something. So I use the example quite a lot in the East Midlands High Peak Council had done wonderful work on merging funding streams together and targeting kind of whole areas. And during our process, we're able to pass that knowledge on. So yeah, kind of not starting from a blank is a really good approach.
And I guess kind of a quite a meaty one from someone in the chat. They're curious why place-based and not community-based. Community-based, they think denotes the same things and makes direct links to community energy. I have some thoughts on this, but I don't know if any of you have specific thoughts on why place-based, not community-based. Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I guess for our project, it's that looking at that whole system. So it kind of makes sense that it's place based, and also we were in the planning stages of Lara. We kind of looked at what size was best. So is it a small scale, ultra, hyper local approach? Is it a regional approach? And we found that kind of that combined authority size approach was best. Yeah.
Helen?
Yeah, I mean, agree with really what Andrew said. I think we want a place-based approach so that we're all working together with the different areas with the housing transport, but you want the community at the heart of it. So you want them to be able to have that input. But the place-based approach will give us better economies of scale, for instance.
Mm. Absolutely. And that's very much what we've found in the work we've been doing, that there are so many components that come into us, and a place-based approach will likely include multiple communities, but also those who might be outside of the community, part of the infrastructure, part of the skills and the supply chain. So it's kind of, I liked your 6 pillars diagram, Andrew, that sort of showed how each of those were brought together. I guess that leads me to say thank you very much for joining us. I'll just share one final last slide. The report is now available to download on our website. We'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So if you do have thoughts and feedback, please do get in touch. And please also do scan the QR code and sign up to our newsletter if you haven't already. That will get you up-to-date information on everything that we're publishing, but also wider resources from the whole retrofit sector. And so, yeah, hopefully that's a really useful thing to get in your inbox every week or two. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you so much to Andrew, Helen, Matthew, and Talisa for joining us today for that session. And apologies we didn't get through more of your questions, but there were some really interesting ones there in the chat. Yeah, see you all soon.